The galaxy was a vast and endless expanse, filled with countless worlds. Some were thriving, with civilizations advancing in technology and culture, while others were forgotten, left behind in the shadows of time. On one such lonely planet, far from the galactic centers, the slavers had arrived once again. Their ship was massive and dark, with grimy, rusted metal and an aura of menace. It had landed in a desolate field on the outskirts of the small settlement, kicking up dust and stirring the few remaining survivors into a frenzy. The slavers were ruthless, their cruel eyes scanning the area for anything they could take. They had been hunting for slaves for as long as anyone could remember, capturing those who were weak or alone, and selling them to the highest bidder. Among the unfortunate souls on this planet was a young woman named Lyra. She had been living a quiet life before the slavers came, but everything had changed when they arrived. The slavers had invaded her home and taken her people, leaving only a few survivors scattered across the planet. They didn't just steal their freedom, they stole their hope. Lyra, though, was different. She wasn't like the other slaves. She had a secret, something buried deep within her that she didn't understand fully. But it made her stronger than the others. It made her more than just a captive. As she stood in the cargo hold of the slave ship, surrounded by fellow prisoners, she could hear the muffled voices of the slavers outside, laughing and talking as they prepared to move their goods. Lyra's hands were bound with heavy chains, her body bruised from the rough handling. The cold metal of the ship pressed against her, and she could feel the weight of fear on her chest. But something inside her stirred. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, a feeling that something was about to change. She didn't know what it was, but she could sense it. Deep down, she knew this moment wasn't like the others. She had seen the slavers take hundreds of people from this planet before, and they had always left with their captives in chains, never to return. But today, something was different. There was a strange energy in the air, something that made her heart beat faster, and she couldn't shake the feeling that this was her chance. She had heard rumors, whispers of a group that was working in the shadows, a group that was fighting, back against the slavers, but she never believed them. Who could stand against the slavers, with their weapons and their armies? Then, as the ship's hatch opened, something unexpected happened. A new ship appeared in the sky, sleek and strange. It didn't look like any ship Lyra had seen before. It was too fast, too smooth, and it moved with a purpose. The slavers' attention shifted instantly, and they raised their weapons, ready for a fight. But Lyra felt a strange calm wash over her. This was no ordinary ship. This was something more. The sleek craft landed in a flash of light, and the hatch opened. Out stepped a figure, a tall being in black, its form almost blending with the shadows. Lyra couldn't make out its face, but she could feel its presence. It wasn't human, but there was a power in it, an unmistakable strength. The figure stood tall, and its voice rang out in the air, clear and commanding. "Release them," it ordered. The slavers hesitated, confused. They were used to being the ones in control, used to being the ones who gave the orders. But this figure wasn't afraid of them. The slavers, though, were arrogant, and they laughed at the stranger's words. "What do you think you're doing?" one of them sneered. "This is our business. Stay out of it." But the figure didn't wait for them to react. Without a word, it raised a hand, and in that instant, the slavers froze. Their weapons fell to the ground, useless. Lyra's heart pounded as she watched the impossible unfold. She had never seen anything like this before. This was no ordinary being. This was something else. The figure turned to her, and in its voice, Lyra heard one word that made her blood run cold. "You." She didn't understand. "Me?" she whispered, unsure if the figure was talking to her. But when the figure spoke again, Its words were clear. "You are the key," it said. The slavers stood frozen in shock, their weapons discarded at their feet, as the mysterious figure approached with an unshakable confidence. The air felt charged, almost alive with a strange energy that no one could explain. Lyra's mind was racing, her heart pounding, unsure of what was happening, yet feeling an undeniable pull toward the figure. This person, no, this being, was unlike anything she had ever seen before. It wasn't human, but it was something more powerful, more purposeful. As it moved closer, Lyra felt a sense of both fear and awe. She had spent her life in chains, under the thumb of ruthless slavers, and now, here was someone who wasn't afraid of them. There was no hesitation, no doubt in the figure's movements. It was as if it had come for a single reason, and that reason was to end the reign of the slavers once and for all. The figure stopped before the slavers, standing, tall and silent. The slavers, still paralyzed by the strange force holding them, were unable to move or speak. It was as though the figure had turned off their will to act, leaving them impotent in their own trap. Lyra, still in chains, watched with a mixture of disbelief and hope. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't completely alone, like there might be a chance for something different. The slavers had controlled everything for so long, owning the lives of countless innocent beings, selling them like cattle to the highest bidder. But now, in this strange moment, it seemed like they were no longer in control. The figure raised its hand and addressed the slavers in a calm, almost serene voice. "You have taken lives for too long," the figure said. "You have stripped others of their freedom, their will, their very humanity. But that ends now." One of the slavers, trying to regain some composure, scowled and took a step forward, but the moment he moved, the figure raised its hand again. The slaver froze, his body locked in place as though time itself had stopped for him. He was powerless, just like all the others. The others began to murmur among themselves, their faces twisted in confusion and fear. They had never encountered anything like this before. No one had ever dared to challenge their empire of fear and greed. But this being, with its mysterious power, was doing just that, and the slavers were helpless in the face of it. Lyra, still uncertain, watched the figure as it turned its attention to her. For a moment, their eyes met, and Lyra felt a strange connection. It was as if the being could see right through her, past the chains, past the fear, and straight into her soul. It wasn't judging her, though. It was merely acknowledging her, as if it knew something important. A voice, soft but clear, echoed in her mind. "You are the key." Confusion swept through Lyra. What did that mean? Was she somehow important to this being? She had never been anyone special. She was just a girl from a small, forgotten world, taken by the slavers like so many others. Yet something about the way the figure spoke made her feel like there was more to her story than she had ever realized. The figure's voice broke through her thoughts again, pulling her from her confusion. "You have a power inside you," it said. "A power the slavers never understood. You are not just a slave. You are the last of a people long forgotten, a people whose abilities were hidden, even from themselves. And now, you will remember." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. What was the figure talking about? Could it be true? Could she really have some hidden power? She didn't understand, but a strange warmth began to build inside her, spreading through her body like light pushing away the dark. The chains that held her seemed less heavy now, as if the very force of her own will could break them. The figure, sensing her growing energy, nodded slightly. "Focus," the figure said. "Let the truth awaken. The slavers have taken everything from you. Now take it back." Lyra closed her eyes, her hands trembling slightly as she concentrated. She had no idea what she was doing, but something inside her was stirring, calling her to action. The warmth spread, and suddenly she felt a surge of energy, something she had never felt before. It was like a door opening inside her mind, revealing powers she had never known existed. With a sharp, instinctive motion, she raised her hands, and the chains binding her snapped apart, clattering to the ground. Lyra looked down at her hands, astonished. For the first time in years, she felt free. Not just physically, but in a way she had never imagined. The chains were gone, and so was the heavy weight of despair she had carried for so long. She was no longer just a slave. She was something else entirely. And the truth the figure had spoken of, was starting to unfold in her mind. The slavers, still powerless, could only watch as Lyra took her first step toward freedom. It wasn't just her freedom at stake now. It was the freedom of all those they had taken, all those they had kept in chains. And with the truth, Lyra knew that the slavers' reign was about to end. The situation had shifted dramatically, and the balance of power was no longer what it had once been. Lyra stood, feeling the surge of newfound strength coursing through her, the weight of her chains now a distant memory. The strange being, still standing in front of her, regarded her with an unreadable expression, as if waiting for something more. The slavers, their faces frozen in shock, could do nothing but watch as Lyra's transformation unfolded before them. They had never encountered anything like this before. Someone who could break free from their control. Someone with power beyond what they had ever seen. They were used to being the ones in charge, but now they were powerless, and that reality was sinking in fast. Lyra could feel the energy pulsing within her, a force that seemed to come from deep inside, as if her very being had tapped into something, far beyond the normal limits of human potential. It was as though she had unlocked a part of herself that had been hidden for years, waiting for the right moment to awaken. The truth, the one the figure had spoken of, was finally becoming clear to her. The slavers had never understood the true nature of the people they had enslaved. They had always seen them as weak, as nothing more than tools to be used. But they were wrong. The people who had been taken, the ones who had been suppressed for so long, carried within them the potential for something extraordinary. And Lyra was the proof of that. The figure, sensing the awakening of Lyra's powers, stepped back slightly, allowing her to take the next step on her own. It wasn't just about freeing the slaves. It was about breaking the cycle of oppression that had lasted for centuries. The slavers had built their empire on fear and manipulation, taking what wasn't theirs and controlling the lives of countless beings. But now, that empire was crumbling. The slavers had underestimated the strength of the people they had sought to dominate, and they were paying the price for it. Lyra's mind raced as she realized the implications of what was happening. The truth wasn't just about her. She wasn't just some chosen individual. The truth was that everyone, every slave the slavers had ever taken, had the potential to break free, to rise up. The power wasn't something that had been given to her. It was something that had always been there, buried deep within. The slavers had kept it hidden, kept it suppressed, but now it was coming to light. It was a power that belonged to everyone who had been oppressed. A power that could be used to bring down the entire structure of the slavers' control. The air was thick with tension, and Lyra could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. This was no longer just a personal battle. It was a war for the freedom of all those who had suffered at the hands of the slavers. And she was no longer alone in this fight. She could feel the presence of others, the other captives on the ship, their own powers beginning to awaken. They were all connected, their strength intertwined, and together they could do what no one had ever imagined. They could overthrow the slavers and bring an end to their reign of terror. But Lyra knew that the battle wasn't going to be easy. The slavers wouldn't give up without a fight. They had too much power, Too much control, and they weren't going to let go without a struggle. But that was no longer a problem for Lyra. She had the truth on her side now, and that truth was stronger than any weapon the slavers could wield. The figure, still watching her with quiet intensity, spoke again, its voice low and steady. "You must lead them. The others will follow you. You are the one who will show them the way." Lyra nodded, understanding the weight of the responsibility placed upon her. It wasn't just about defeating the slavers. It was about leading a movement, about awakening others to their true potential. She wasn't just a symbol of hope anymore. She was the catalyst for change, the one who would ignite the spark that would set the galaxy on fire. With a deep breath, Lyra stepped forward, her mind clear and her purpose solid. The truth had changed everything, and the slavers were finished. The battle for freedom had just begun. The air was thick with tension as Lyra stood at the forefront of the gathering. The moment she had longed for, the moment she had fought to reach, was finally here. She wasn't just one person anymore. The power inside her, the truth that had been unlocked, was contagious. It spread like wildfire, igniting something deep inside the other slaves who had once been bound by fear and despair. The truth had awakened a force within them, something ancient, something powerful. They weren't just slaves. They were warriors, ready to fight for their freedom. The slavers, though still standing frozen in their place, could feel the shift. They had always ruled with cruelty and force, their empire built on the backs of the weak. But now, the tables had turned. It wasn't just one girl who had broken free. It was the beginning of something bigger. The slaves were no longer afraid. They had felt the spark of rebellion, and it had ignited within them a fire they could no longer ignore. Their powers they hadn't known they possessed, began to manifest in small ways at first. A flicker of light here, a burst of energy there. It was chaotic, but it was real. Lyra's heart raced as she watched them. She was no longer the only one with power. The slavers had kept them oppressed for so long, believing that they were nothing more than tools to be used and discarded. But now, as Lyra looked out across the room, she saw a different reality. The slaves had become more than what the slavers had made them. They had become something they had never been allowed to be: free. And together, they were a force to be reckoned with. But Lyra knew that they had to act fast. The longer they waited, the more the slavers could regroup, the more they could find a way to regain control. She had to lead them, to help them harness their newfound power, before the slavers realized what was happening. She stepped forward, raising her hands to calm the others. She didn't need to speak loudly. Her presence alone was enough. The room quieted, the energy in the air settling down, and all eyes turned to her. "We have the power now," Lyra said, her voice steady but full of purpose. "We've been held down for so long, made to believe we were weak. But we are not weak. We are strong, and we are not alone. The truth has shown us that. We have a power inside of us, a power that the slavers will never understand. And it's time to use it." The crowd of slaves nodded, their faces filled with determination. Lyra could see it in their eyes. They were ready. They weren't just following her because she was leading them. They were following because they had found their own strength, their own power. They were no longer just victims. They were fighters, ready to take back what was theirs. But even as the slaves rallied behind her, Lyra knew that they still had a long way to go. The slavers would not give up easily. They had vast resources, an army at their disposal, and they wouldn't hesitate to use it to crush any rebellion. The truth had given Lyra and the others the strength they needed to fight back. But they still had to be smart. They had to outmaneuver the slavers, to strike when they were least expecting it. Lyra turned to the mysterious figure who had helped them awaken their power. The figure, standing silently by her side, gave a subtle nod. It was clear that Lyra was not meant to fight this battle alone. The figure was there to guide her, to help her understand the full extent of the power they had unlocked. There was much more to learn, much more to understand, but they had time. The slavers, after all, were still reeling from the sudden shift in power. "We will move quickly," Lyra said, her voice growing stronger. "We'll strike fast, take them by surprise. And once we've freed ourselves, we'll make sure no one else ever has to live in chains again." The slaves cheered, their voices rising in a unified roar. Lyra smiled, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. This was it. This was the beginning of the end for the slavers. Together, they were unstoppable, and she would lead them, no matter what it took. The final confrontation was set into motion, and Lyra felt the weight of everything pressing down on her. There was no turning back now. The slaves, once docile and afraid, were now a united force. Their powers were growing stronger, and the truth had spread through them like wildfire. The slavers had underestimated the people they had enslaved. They thought they could break them, control them, but they had been wrong. The strength that had always been within the slaves was now unlocked, and they stood united, ready to reclaim what had been stolen from them for so long. The slavers, sensing the shift in power, were scrambling. They had relied on their weapons, their technology, and their armies to maintain control. But Lyra and the others weren't fighting with weapons. They were fighting with something far stronger: their will, their unity, and the raw, untapped power that had been hidden within them for centuries. The truth had changed everything, and the slavers were no longer in control of their own destiny. The battle that followed was fierce. The slaves, now warriors in their own right, fought with a newfound sense of purpose. They weren't just fighting for their freedom anymore. They were fighting for the freedom of all those who had been oppressed, for all those who had been silenced and held down. Every punch, every blast of energy, every step forward was a testament to the truth they had discovered within themselves. The slavers, once so powerful and intimidating, were now on the defensive, overwhelmed by the sheer force of the rebellion. Lyra, at the forefront of the battle, felt the power coursing through her veins. She could sense the energy of the others, their power flowing in sync with hers. It was like nothing she had ever experienced. Every movement felt right. Every decision felt certain. The truth had unlocked something in her, and now she understood her purpose. She wasn't just leading the fight for her own freedom. She was leading it for the freedom of everyone who had ever been oppressed, and for the future of the galaxy. But even as the slavers began to falter, Lyra knew that the battle was far from over. The slavers still had resources, still had technology, still had their own soldiers. But what they didn't have anymore was control over the will of the people, and that was the key. Lyra wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for a new world. A world where no one would ever have to suffer the way she and so many others had suffered. A world where the truth would be known, and where the power to change things would belong to everyone, not just the powerful few. Why? Final push came quickly, and the slavers, realizing they were losing, tried to make a last stand. But it was too late. The truth had already spread too far, and their empire, built on fear and oppression, was crumbling. The slaves, now empowered and united, overwhelmed the remaining forces. The tide had turned, and the slavers had no way of stopping it. Their reign was over. As the last of the slavers were taken down, Lyra stood amidst the chaos, her heart racing, her body exhausted, but victorious. She had led them to freedom, and the truth had been their weapon. The galaxy would never be the same. The slaves were free, and the slavers had been defeated. But Lyra knew this was just the beginning. They had to rebuild, to heal, and to ensure that the horrors of the past would never return. The truth had changed everything, and now it was up to her and the others to ensure that the future was brighter, more just, and more free for everyone. The slavers were finished, and the people had won.